and sound engineers in both Auckland and Wellington have gone above and beyond in Level 3 and Level 4 restrictions. Thanks, Robert Kelly. And a special thanks to the wonderful Bridget Burke as RNZ welcomes a new head of content. Congratulations on the appointment, Bridget. Absolutely well deserved. And the panel's back on Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone. News is next. And then Lisa Owen with Checkpoint. Good afternoon.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei. It's all happening across the ditch. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian has resigned amid a corruption investigation, and the country reopens its borders. We'll go live to Australia. A King Country family who vanished for 17 days survived on bush food and rice. Brace for another 36 Delta cases, health authorities warn. Māori vaccination rates in the super city are not so super. So what can we expect at next week's alert level review? An epidemiologist calls for a level V2 in Auckland. The mother of slain police officer Matthew Hunt condemns the shooter's getaway driver. And the nutty story of a squirrel who stored, hundreds of kilos of walnuts.
Ahi Māori e, RNZ News at 5, ko Sarah Thompson tōko ingoa. The sister of a King Country man who sparked a massive search after he went bush with his 3 young children for 17 days says they're all in good health. Tom Phillips and his children returned to his parents' farmhouse in Marokopa yesterday morning. His sister, Rosie Petherbridge, says it's been a harrowing time for the rest of the family, but the children are in great shape.
He had good shelter, he had a tent. And he was near a good clean water source. He had plenty of food. He's a bushman. He make do with what's around him and had a couple of staple supplies, and they were warm and dry and well fed, and they were perfectly fine.
Rosie Petherbridge says the family owes a debt of gratitude to everyone who helped in the search. You can hear the rest of that interview on Checkpoint shortly. People are being urged to treat essential workers with kindness and respect after a number of incidents where people have been abused. The Director of Public Health, Caroline McElnay, says there have been reports that people working on Auckland's border, in supermarkets and on Healthline have been subjected to verbal abuse and even physical violence.
I know that this is a tough situation for everyone, but this sort of behaviour does and can have significant impact on the mental well-being of our essential workers. So I'm asking New Zealanders to please be kind and treat our essential workers with courtesy and respect.
Over the course of the outbreak, several people have been charged for threatening supermarket staff. Just one of today's COVID-19 cases, that number 19, has not yet been linked to known other cases. The mother of slain policeman Matthew Hunt is pleased a getaway driver has been held accountable for helping his killer evade arrest. Natalie Bracken was jailed for 12 months today, but Diane Hunt says she is reminded daily of the violence police officers have to deal with. Katie Todd reports.
Natalie Bracken was sentenced via audio-visual link in the High Court in Auckland this morning. A jury had found her guilty of being an accessory after the fact in July. Bracken watched Eli Epiha shoot 2 officers on a West Auckland street last June, then retrieved a set of car keys and drove the killer to his friend's house. In a victim impact statement, Diane Hunt condemned Bracken's unbelievable selfishness, and Mrs Hunt told RNZ in hindsight she would have begged her son to get a different job. Eli Epiha is due to be sentenced later this month.
The Premier of New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian, has resigned amid an investigation by the state's corruption watchdog. Public hearings will be held later this month to investigate whether there was a conflict between Ms Berejiklian's public duties and private interests when she was in a personal relationship with then MP Daryl Maguire. A farmer in Australia has described the moment a tornado lashed the central west region of New South Wales. The rare tornado struck last night, whipping up debris and damaging homes. Our correspondent Sean Bindley reports.
About 4 homes in the town of Bathurst have been badly damaged and 3 people were injured when the storm tore through the area. Scott McKinnon told Radio 2GB that he had to hang on to his kitchen bench as the roof of his home was being ripped off.
My feet were hanging out from the window, and I finally pulled myself back down, and as I looked out, I see the big pine trees, probably 15-tonne of pine trees, just getting whipped up in the air. They spun off, went out in the paddock. Then over the other paddock there, cows get spun around, they got chucked around, and then it spun off into 2. Then went back over the hill and back off the 1, and it was gone.
Many properties in the area are holiday homes. It's 4 minutes past 5. A 72-year-old Auckland man is entertaining himself during lockdown by running routes in the shape of a kiwi, the Australian map, and Godzilla. Ronald Chen carefully plans the shapes on his running app before heading out in his Howick neighbourhood. He runs 15 to 20 kilometres every day. Mr Chen started to run 8 years ago and has completed more than 130 marathons and 300 half marathons. Moving now into sport news, the All Blacks are likely to go for higher scoring options in tomorrow night's test against South Africa on the Gold Coast. New Zealand captain Ardie Savea opted for attacking lineouts instead of shots at goal on several occasions in last weekend's narrow win over the Springboks. Savea says that was a great learning curve for him and his leadership team.
There'll be, some changes and we'll discuss and think twice than going to the line out all the time. So we live and we learn. And for me, that was a great learning experience for me. So, this week, hopefully, if those opportunities come up, we'll take it.
The Wellington Phoenix coach, Ufuk Talay, says he made Stephen Taylor the A-League football team's new captain in a bid to keep him at the club. The veteran English defender made a shock retirement this week, just days after being announced as captain. Ufuk Talay says he knew Taylor wasn't looking forward to the prospect of another season based in Australia and hoped offering him the leadership of the team would persuade him to stay. And finally, the Australian cricket captain Tim Paine says the Ashes will go ahead regardless of some England players' reluctance to deal with tough COVID-19 quarantine restrictions. England skipper Joe Root has expressed doubt about the tour due to bubble fatigue and Australia's strict protocols. Negotiations are ongoing, but Tim Paine says the Ashes will be played whether Root decides to travel or not. And that's the news.
Tomorrow morning, the biographer of the enigmatic billionaire Peter Thiel, a New Zealand citizen now, of course. The vast and revealing journey of Bill, the southern right whale. And Anthony Doerr, author of All the Light We Cannot See, has a new novel called Cloud Cuckoo Land. Ko Kim Hilaho, join me Saturday morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Aharoe Saturday. In the west from Northland to Manawatu, also for the central high country, partly cloudy with isolated showers. And for the remainder of the North Island, it'll be generally fine with some cloudy areas this evening and tomorrow morning. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury will be fine, apart from cloud about coastal Canterbury tonight and tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland will be mainly fine, with a few showers about the south coast and the chance of a shower about eastern Otago tomorrow. Bulla and Westland will be partly cloudy with the odd shower and long fine spells south of Hokitika tonight. Fiordland will be mostly cloudy with occasional rain or showers, and for the Chatham Islands, a few showers. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Aharoe Saturday. It's 7 minutes past 5.
Nā mihi, Sarah. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Coming up, how did the King Country family survive 17 days in the bush? And could Auckland be staring down the barrel of a Delta Alert Level 2V? More on that shortly, but we begin tonight in Australia, where in the past hour, 2 major press conferences have taken place. In a bombshell announcement, Gladys Berejiklian has resigned as New South Wales Premier. It comes after the state's corruption watchdog revealed it is investigating whether she breached public trust. She says standing aside isn't an option and she'll be resigning and leaving Parliament. In another announcement, Prime Minister Scott Morrison says come next month, Australia's international border will reopen again. Our correspondent in Sydney, Gavin Coote, joins us now. Well, Gavin, it's all happening where you are. So tell us about Gladys first. Why did she have to go?
Look, this will certainly come as a shock for so many Australians, and I guess she has a bit of an international profile as well for her handling of the bushfires and the COVID pandemic. But I think this had been swirling for some time. What happened is she'd been in a secret relationship with another member of Parliament, Darryl Maguire. And he had actually admitted he'd been acting corruptly. We didn't actually realise until last year when the Independent Commission Against Corruption was questioning Gladys Berejiklian. She let slip that, or she basically revealed that she'd been in a relationship with him for some years. But that she was able to sort of, I guess keep those two things separate. Her role as Treasurer of the State and then Premier eventually, and her relationship with Darryl Maguire. Now, it's become clear that it's going to be tricky to sort of, separate those two things because of there are phone calls that she had with Darryl where she's been recorded, where she has some knowledge of deals he'd done. So that's now all going to be part of an ICAC or an Independent Commission Against Corruption inquiry. But she says she can't have this sort of lingering as the leader. She needs some clear air here during, of course, what is an extremely difficult time for New South Wales.
So is the subject of the investigation whether this relationship compromised any decisions she made around funding?
That's correct, because given, he has been found guilty, or he's admitted that he sought payment over some property deals. He was basically telling investors that he could get them access to the Premier, which it's now obviously been revealed, is his what was his then girlfriend. So now she is going to have to sort of explain how this does not, how this hasn't brought her into disrepute or, hasn't been corrupt behaviour. That's obviously going to be up to the ICAC now. But she's been getting questions about this increasingly over recent weeks. There have been investigations done by the ABC that have shown that, she is a person of interest by ICAC, and she was starting to get asked questions about this at the COVID press conferences, which in part some suggested was, she started actually doing press conferences a little bit less frequently once those questions were being asked. So some were suggesting that was behind that. But really, at the moment, she's actually going to have to go and present to ICAC. So it just to her, it'll be untenable to go through that process while this is all happening, and she's leading the state through the recovery. She's going to leave she's going to leave the Parliament altogether. So there's going to be a new leader and a by-election in her electorate as well.
Yeah, so where does that leave the state? Because it's in the grip of a current COVID outbreak, 800 new cases today. So what happens?
It's really interesting because I think if it was a different Premier, last year when this first came up, it was incredibly damaging for her profile. I think she had a lot of political capital because she shepherded New South Wales through what was probably our worst bushfire disaster, and up until that point we'd already had one lockdown or one outbreak of COVID, and she got some marks for that, for handling that well, and that seemed to sort of be able to. There was a bit of a talk of maybe a leadership spill, but that didn't come to pass. So she was able to hold on, but it appears now, she's got to be beyond reproach with this stuff, and she's set such a high bar for her ministers on these kinds of questions. So now she has to basically follow the same standard. But the question is whether this is a state, New South Wales being the most populous state of Australia, hasn't had a Premier serve a full term and get re-elected since Bob Carr. Now, that's going on 20 years now. And 3 Premiers in probably the last 20, 30-odd years have had to resign because of corruption, the ICAC investigating them. So there is a long-running sort of history here of Premiers' instability. They're going to need, obviously, someone who can, provide some level of stability, and it's not going to be quite straightforward who that will be. But they're going to, have a very big task on their hands now.
So while she was giving this press conference, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, was having his own press conference and says the borders will reopen next month. Can you give us a quick summary of what that would look like? Who'll be allowed to travel? What restrictions there'll be?
Yeah, this is all hinging on vaccination rates have gone up very quickly. And New South Wales is leading that. So we're just about to hit 70% double dose for over 16-year-olds. So it's likely we will be the first state that can start opening up. People can start travelling overseas from next month, and there'll also be some measures as well, some charter flights to bring people home, because there are still large amounts of people that are stranded overseas. So certainly New South Wales seems to be on track to be the first that will have some sort of, even though we're right in the middle of this Delta outbreak, we'll have that level of protection available, but there'll be a lot of other measures involved. Home quarantine up to 7 days. People will need to obviously be double vaccinated. And then it's a question of where can you travel? You'll need some sort of, arrangements with other COVID-safe countries with, similar levels of vaccination and protection.
Good to talk to you, Gavin. That is Gavin Cooke joining us live there from Sydney. All happening in Australia. They say they're opening the borders next month, and the New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian, is stepping down from her position amid allegations of corruption. Back home, brace for another 35 Delta cases in the coming days. There's 19 new community infections confirmed today, but health authorities estimate there will be about 36 more based on transmission rates and the number of household contacts. And they're keeping an eye on 5 active sub-clusters, but 2 in particular, one in West Auckland and another in the southeast of the city that is connected to transitional or emergency housing. More than 65 Middlemore Hospital patients have potentially been exposed to the virus after 2 people in separate incidents turned up to the hospital on Wednesday night and later tested positive for the virus. And Te Premier Jacinda Ardern has already confirmed that the hard border will remain around Auckland, even if alert levels shift next week. Auckland University epidemiologist Professor Rod Jackson explains what restrictions he'd put on the ring-fenced city.
I think that we need a level 2V, and that's a level 2 vaccination. So what I would like to see right now is that all of the political parties get together just around vaccination. I know they've got lots of other problems, but they're all 100% behind vaccination. They signal to New Zealand that you will be getting vaccination passports by a certain date. I think that's in a month, they say, they're going to be available. So they say that your vaccine passport's coming out on this date, and if you will need a vaccination passport to do many things. Go to a pub, go to a restaurant, whatever. Look, there's a whole lot of things you could do. Fly. And so I would signal to the public, you've got a month to get vaccinated. So that's the first one. We need to go hard. And so for the rest of the country, I think we can go to a level 1V. And again, it's the same thing, that people who are vaxxed get to live in a different level. This is what's happening elsewhere in Australia. I see it with schools. It's no jab, no job, anyone at a school. I think we need to go hard out. But the only way we can do that is if we've got support from everybody. I think it should be a short-term intervention, maybe 6 months or 12 months, but we have to get to 95% plus, and I say that because Singapore is at 90%, and they're having a large outbreak. So 90% is not good enough.
So, Rod, in your level 2V, you encourage people by telling them they'll miss out if they don't get vaccinated, right? In the meantime, say in Auckland, next week, would you allow people to go to malls, to churches? How big would gatherings be that you would be comfortable in this ring-fenced Auckland?
I would go to something like that 2.5. I would, so I think 50. I think if we've got no mystery cases on Monday and Tuesday, then we could do a 2.5. Give it a go. I mean, everyone's sick of lockdown. But I think the key thing is everything we do in the next few months is simply stopgap measures until we get vaccination levels up to a level where we can open up.
Do you think that we can achieve the vaccination rates that we need, and you've put it at around 95%, without taking a hard line and excluding people from certain venues?
Not without a hard line. No, I think we went early and we went hard with lockdown. It's now late, but we have to go hard with vaccination. I don't think we'll achieve 95% without encouragement. And I guess it's all a carrot and a stick.
Yeah, but you're talking stick, aren't you, Rod? Not carrot.
No, I'm talking a carrot for people who want to travel. I'm talking a carrot for people who want to go to a restaurant. You could call it, well, it's a carrot. Is it a carrot or a stick? Look at Australia, they're doing it. Look at the States, they're doing it. Europe, I was on a call with the group who organised the Irish vaccination rollout, and they said one of the absolute key factors in their success for younger people was the vaccine passport. They couldn't do anything without a vaccine passport. They're not going to need to use it anymore, but they said it was a tipping point. It was the thing that got a lot of people over the line.
So I'm going to ask this question, thinking I know what your answer will be, but what can Aucklanders do this weekend to get a step closer to normal life?
Go get vaccinated. And everyone can get vaccinated. That's the great thing. New Zealanders now, anyone who wants to get vaccinated can get vaccinated this weekend. I'd like to see 100,000 people getting vaccinated in a day. People have asked me often on radio and TV, do you have one final message? And my message is, if you want to give the best Christmas present to your friends and family, go get vaccinated by the end of October, because then you'll be double vaccinated by mid-December, and you can have a safe and free Christmas with your family and your friends. There is one message. It's almost like the answer to every question that people are asking me. The answer is vaccination. There really is no other answer.
And that's Auckland University epidemiologist Professor Rod Jackson. Homai o whakaaro, love your feedback on that one. He's suggesting an alert level V2. Give people a 1-month deadline to get their first vaccination, or start to exclude them using vaccination certificates. No restaurants, no malls, no concerts. You get 1 month, that's it, and then everyone gets a vax certificate. What do you make of that idea? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 22 minutes past 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rā watu mo te whakarongo mai, e haere ake nei. Coming up, a 4-day drive-through vaccination event gets underway. A King Country father and his 3 children, missing in bush for 17 days, survived on bush food and rice. Tom Phillips and his children had not been seen for 17 days until they returned home out of the blue yesterday morning. An extensive 2-week land and sea search was called off last week. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe have spent the day in Marokopa unravelling the family's disappearance and reappearance.
Hi Lisa, well I'm standing just above the seaside village of Marokopa here on the North Island's west coast, and what I can tell you is this is a true tale of a family going bush. It appears Tom and his kids were, well, more than prepared for those more than 2 weeks in dense bush kilometres south of here. Now, there was no official media conference today. In fact, the police told us the family would not be doing any interviews, but Tom's sister Rosie did agree to front for Checkpoint.
How did he and the kids manage to survive in the elements for that amount of time? Because obviously that's a question people have.
Yeah, well he had good shelter, he had a tent, and he was near a good clean water source. He had plenty of food, he's a bushman, he make do with what's around him, and had a couple of staple supplies, and they were warm and dry and well fed, and they were perfectly fine.
What did they eat? What sort of?
Oh, I think there was a bit of bush food and a bit of rice and whatever else they ate, but they all looked just as happy as they normally do on any other day.
So obviously, he had cooking facilities and
Yeah, he must have had a Primus or something, I guess. Had a wee gas cooker and a pot or billy, I guess. Yep.
Talk about the emotions yesterday. What were you doing at the time when the news came through, and what went through your head?
Just finishing morning chores and getting all the kids fed and animals fed. Emotions was just shock and disbelief, relief, joy, a lot of joy, but still, you know, a massive amount of disbelief that they were here. Yep.
What was it like seeing, obviously, your two nieces and your nephew, and your brother again? Just describe that.
Oh, just pure joy, really, you know, pure joy to see them and see that they were well and they were here, they'd come home. It was just amazing, massive relief. Yeah.
In contrast, last 17 days, what's that been like for you and your mum and dad and the rest of the family?
Oh, harrowing, absolutely horrific. Wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, and just emotional roller coaster from hopes that they would be found in the first few days and the pressure of everything that was going on through to, you know, losing hope that they were gone forever, grief, but nobody to mourn yet, and, you know, just a major roller coaster with just a real strong numbness, real numb and deeply sad.
How are Tom and the kids?
Yeah, they're great. They're perfectly normal, just normal as happy. The kids are playing with their cousins and doing pictures and drawing pictures and having a great time. So yeah, they're just normal and happy as. Great.
Any messages that the family have for, not just the rescuers, but obviously the rest of New Zealand? It's been a pretty big story over the last 2 weeks plus.
Yeah, well, a massive thank you, like a huge thank you for all the prayer and support that we've all received for everyone, but in particularly, you know, we have a huge debt of gratitude to the New Zealand Police, Lanza, you know, the fire guys, surf lifesaving, Coast Guard, the local iwi in particular, the local community, and just everyone that put their heart and souls, and we all worked to have the best possible outcome, which at times looked like it wasn't going to be, but everyone did work and pull together for the awesome outcome that we've had, and we're just really, really grateful.
Are you able to say what now and what next?
I think at the moment we're just all really trying to reconnect and, you know, understand everything and just surround them with love and support and understanding, and just take each day as it comes. It's just a very emotional time for all of us, and we just ask that people do respect our privacy and take our sincerest thanks and gratitude for everything that everyone has contributed to this positive outcome of them all coming home safely.
And that's Tom Phillips' sister, Rosie Pethybridge, speaking to Nick Trubridge. And if you're listening to that on radio, the video from our two Nicks will go up on our Facebook page. Now, the police will not be interviewed today. They say they are still speaking with Tom and their inquiries are continuing. The mother of slain police constable Matthew Hunt has condemned the getaway driver for her unbelievable selfishness on the day her son was gunned down. Natalie Bracken has been sentenced to 12 months in prison after she helped shooter Eli Epiha evade arrest in West Auckland last June. In July this year, a jury found her guilty on one charge of being an accessory after the fact. Katie Todd reports.
Natalie Bracken was just metres away at a house on Raynella Drive when Eli Epiha crashed his car and shot 2 officers. She saw Matthew Hunt dying in the middle of the road and Constable David Goldfinch running for his life, and decided to pick up a set of car keys. Bracken didn't know the armed assailant, but gave him a ride to his friend's house in Taupaki. Today, this was the message from Matthew Hunt's mother, Diane.
My son would have come to help you and your children if you ever needed it. He would have risked his life to save yours and your children's. But drifting aimlessly through your life, you heard the car crash and the gunshots on that terrible day, and you wanted to be a part of it. Seeing my son dead or dying on the ground, you tried to get the attention of his murderer so that you could help him evade the police.
The police found Bracken at a house in Te Atatu the day after the shooting, with her hair freshly dyed. In an interview, Bracken tearfully claimed she had been threatened by the gunman. Later on, her lawyer Adam Couchman told jurors she thought she was doing the right thing, intentionally stopping Epiha from hurting anyone else. That suggestion was rejected by Crown Prosecutor Brian Dickey during today's virtual sentencing in the High Court in Auckland.
All that Ms Bracken achieved was to move the danger from Ranella Drive or Massey to an unknown place where Mr Epiha would seek to flee.
Justice Venning said Bracken's actions also helped Epiha dispose of 2 guns, which he could have used further.
It was only a matter of chance and good policing that Mr Epiha was able to be apprehended within a few hours and without further violence.
In a victim impact statement, Diane Hunt pointed out that Bracken could have called 111 to help the officers. She said Bracken never reported Epiha to the police or admitted what she'd done.
You had the opportunity to take responsibility for your actions that day. Instead, you made us all sit through a 2-week trial. Your behaviour during the trial just reinforced how little you actually care. You laughed many times with your guard during the evidence, and we had to sit there and watch you. Your selfishness is unbelievable.
Before sentencing Natalie Bracken, Justice Venning told her she could still turn her life around.
To do that, you will need the support of your family, and you are fortunate, it seems, that you have that. But importantly, if you are to turn your life around, you need to remove yourself from your association with people who use serious drugs and people who have the sort of negative attitude towards police and authority.
Eli Epiha was meant to be sentenced today on 1 charge of murder, 1 of attempted murder, and 1 of reckless driving causing injury. That sentencing won't happen while Auckland is at alert level 3, so it's been rescheduled to later this month.
That report from Katie Todd. Kia ora e te iwi e haere nei I a checkpoint why less than 50% of eligible Māori have received their first vaccination in Northland and what we can do about it. Wedding planners are hard hit with Auckland divorced from the rest of the country and the greedy squirrel and the Chevy truck it used as a winter pantry. You will not want to miss this industrious little squirrel. Homai o whakaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Do get in touch about this idea of a level V2. One epidemiologist is suggesting that people get a month to get their vaccination. We bring in passports after that and you're excluded from certain events once we hit the deadline of 1 month if you aren't vaccinated. Patui mai, text me 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or you can email checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines now. Ko Sarah anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. RNZ News headlines. Ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The Premier of New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian, has resigned amid an investigation by the state's corruption watchdog. Public hearings later this month will examine whether there was a conflict between Ms Berejiklian's public duties and private interests when she was in a personal relationship with then MP Daryl Maguire. Mr Maguire resigned after he admitted to a separate inquiry that he sought payment over a property deal. The sister of a King Country man who sparked a massive search says it's been an emotional rollercoaster for the family, who feared he and his children were dead. Tom Phillips and his 3 children returned to his parents' farmhouse in Marokopa yesterday morning after 17 days camping out in the bush. Rosie Petherbridge told Checkpoint her brother and his children had a tent, water and lived off rice and what Mr Phillips could hunt. The Director of Public Health, Caroline McElnay, is urging people to be kind and respectful to essential workers. There have been reports of verbal abuse and even physical violence directed at people working on Auckland's border, in supermarkets and on Healthline. Just 1 of today's COVID-19 cases has not yet been linked to any known cases. A man has been charged after yesterday's dramatic police chase from Otahuhu to the suburb of Hillsborough. The police say a 28-year-old man has been charged with presenting a firearm to police, dangerous driving and failing to stop. Another man who was shot by police remains in hospital under police guard. And finally, Australia will reopen its international border from next month, allowing fully vaccinated citizens to quarantine at home for 7 days. Prime Minister Scott Morrison says states with vaccination rates above 80% will get travel freedoms. He says commercial flights out of the country will also resume for vaccinated Australians. Those are your headlines. Our next news and sport update is at 6.
Thanks, Sarah. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa e nainei, ko Nona Peltier, who's here to talk business. Nona, consumer confidence, it's dropped with some worrying signs for retailers. What does this survey tell us? And does it catch the lockdown?
It does catch the lockdown. This is the ANZ Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Survey, and it shows there's been a 5-point fall from August to 104.5. Now, while that is still in the optimism territory, it does indicate that confidence among consumers is easing and that a number of people are being put off by the Auckland lockdown and a shortage of goods. And so what's worrying for retailers is that there's a net 7% that feel it's a bad time to buy big ticket items like washing machines and fridges. Now, the ANZ chief economist Sharon Zollner says there could be a lot of reasons behind that, but one of the most obvious ones is that prices are increasing. Mortgage rates look like they're going to rise, and people are starting to think maybe they need to put some money aside to pay for extra costs and so forth, or they're just feeling a bit more cautious. And in any case, it does seem that the lockdown is having an effect. Certainly, it seems that people are a little bit more concerned about money.
And Nona, Circle K, right? This is the big convenience store brand. It's looking to expand. So what's its plan?
Yeah, so there's a company called Pamna, that is, Retail Group. It has the license for Circle K in New Zealand. And that's a very big brand, by the way. They've got like 14,000 locations worldwide. They're looking to open another 100 or more in New Zealand. And what they're going to do is, how they're planning to do it is they're going to try and convert about 2% of the 5,000 convenience stores that are in New Zealand right now to the Circle K brand. And what they're going to be looking for are ones that are well located so that they become electric vehicle service stations and or fuel, petrol and that kind of thing, sort of along what we see with a lot of service stations with convenience included. So this is what they're looking to do. They think that this is going to offer a new revenue stream for convenience stores who are finding it harder, or perhaps their customers have died off as a result of tobacco revenue in recent years. So this is a new way of them making some money. And we'll see how it takes off, but that's their plan.
And Nona, what numbers have you got for us?
Look, our market was hardly changed at all. We rose just 3 points to 13,279. And the dollar is steady at 68.9 US cents. That's about where it was yesterday, 95.5 Australian and 51.2 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite, that's Nona Peltier with Business. The government is telling people to do two things this weekend: get vaxxed and get tested before Monday's alert level decision. COVID cases have levelled off today, with 19 reported in the community. All are in Auckland, and all but one are already linked to other cases. However, health officials are warning they're expecting dozens of household contacts to test positive in the coming days. And as political reporter Charlie Drever reports, the government has been setting its sights on the marae today to get as many needles in arms as possible.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern talking to those who overcame their concerns to get vaccinated at Wainuiomata Marae in Lower Hutt today.
I think it's the needle.
Do you reckon?
For me it was. But actually it's not too bad.
No, it doesn't hurt.
Actually I'm scared of needles and it didn't really hurt at all.
Health and Social Services Manager at Kokiri Marae, Teresa Olsen, says it's been tough not to be able to hold tangi at the marae, but it's been necessary to get people vaccinated.
If this COVID gets out of control, it's Māori and Pacific people that are going to die. That's a no-brainer, right? You can't argue with that.
But there have been ongoing problems with misinformation in the community.
We have had anti-vaxxers here putting things on Facebook and saying, thousands are dying at Wainuiomata Marae. It's been terrible.
She and others have been working with the community to provide useful information to dispel the myths and provide transport for those who have none. The Prime Minister's confident high vaccination rates among Māori and rangatahi can be achieved.
We've seen that for our older people, they're hitting over 90% vaccinated, and so that tells us that it is possible across different populations, across Māori, across Pacific, to get really high rates of vaccination.
In one of Auckland's newest suburbs of interest, a new initiative has been set up at Papakura Marae, with Auckland Metro GPs trying to address concerns people may have. Director of Public Health, Dr Caroline McElnay, says it will be targeting Māori and Pacifica who are yet to get their first Pfizer jab.
We estimate that's about 110,000 people. So this initiative means that those GPs will be calling their patients to understand what barriers stand in their way and to see how they can be supported to get vaccinated.
For 2 days in a row, community cases have remained at 19, a big difference from the 45 case spike on Wednesday. However, Dr McElnay warns more are expected over the weekend.
We know from the number of already notified cases that there could be an estimated additional 35 cases in coming days among household contacts.
Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson says Aucklanders should not become complacent and should get tested.
It will be one of the things that Cabinet will be thinking about when we're making decisions on Monday, is our confidence that we are getting the level of testing we need to understand that we continue to have this outbreak under control. And of course, take the opportunity this weekend to be vaccinated as well.
He also says Cabinet will be looking at unlinked cases rather than just case numbers alone. At present, there are 9 cases over the last 14 days which are yet to be linked.
A 4-day drive-through vaccination event began today, aiming to boost vaccinations, particularly in Pacifica communities. People have been encouraged to rally their village, signing up friends, family and more, with prizes on offer for the team that mobilises the most people. And as our reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi found out, it's far from your average vaccine appointment.
It's a drive-through vaccination event like no other, with music, food packs, petrol vouchers and $100,000 worth of spot prizes on offer. You could easily mistake it for a carnival. This is Rally Your Village. Over the last few weeks, people have been encouraged to get friends, family, youth groups, churches and schools booked in for their COVID vaccine here at the Vodafone Events Centre. Irata Pasi is the clinical lead for the event, just over an hour in, and she's already pleased with their numbers.
Before we open, like 8:30, we have cars already lined, which is good. It's a bit rushed this morning, more cars coming through this morning. And then now I just check our admin for our numbers. Now we reach 100. So 100 already reached since this morning at 8:30.
They're hoping to vaccinate 2,000 people a day over the next 4 days, 8,000 all up. And for any hesitant people or those with last-minute nerves, they're prepared.
We have 2 doctors on site at the moment. So this model, we have doctors 4 days, and having the doctors, it's more like for our young ones to more comfortable. Talking to the doctor, it's more for them to more confident and more comfortable to have the vaccination today.
Hi guys, how are you? Casalina was on the fence about the vaccine. Now she's glad she's had it.
I guess just everything else that you see on social media. It's that whole thing leading up to it. But I realise once you get here, once you get it done, it's just kind of like, okay, it's just like every other vaccination that you would go get. So once you get it done, I guess for me it's a feeling of relief.
Along with her 2 older children, they're now counting down to their second dose. There are shuttles being organised for families that need them to get to vaccination centres. Casalina wouldn't be able to get here otherwise.
My vehicle is currently sitting at the mechanics getting fixed. So otherwise we wouldn't be able to get out here because I don't know how long I'll be out of a ride for.
She's got a message for other families in similar situations.
Come now, especially while they've got services like this going.
After their jab, food parcels, petrol vouchers and kids packs are delivered through car windows. Even rugby balls signed by the Samoan rugby team were up for grabs. Anne Avia has been getting people from Manurewa Youth Worship Centre to sign up. She says the event is helping eliminate any obstacles.
Most of our parents at home are stuck with kids, and taking them out or just leaving them at home on their own so that they could get vaxxed was quite a barrier for most of our parents. But so far with this, they can just drive through, kids can be in the car, it's all good. They'll still be safe, they've got their own safe space, and there's goodie bags to keep the kids quiet and busy.
That's echoed by those driving through today.
Mine's that they're doing something different to attract people to come and do the vaccine.
When they text me and say if I wanted to come to do my second vaccine, and I say yes. Plus, they got some food for us here, so that's why we come here. Just come down here, do your vaccine, don't be afraid, don't take other people's advice, just make sure you come here, do your vaccine, help your family, support your community, and let New Zealand be COVID-free.
The event's running until Monday evening, when South Seas Healthcare is hoping they'll be close to their 8,000 vaccinations goal. And they'll have more insight into how many villages have been vaccinated to get closer to New Zealand's 90% target.
And if you were listening to that on radio, we'll put Louise and Marika's piece up on our Facebook page so you can check out the video. It is 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Hey, Muriaki na pita pita kōrero. After the news at 6, we crunched the vaccination numbers for Auckland. How far off is the Prime Minister's 90% plus target? Businesses in Te Tai Tokerau are feeling the strain as Auckland's closed border keeps visitors at bay. News the city's checkpoints will stay during level 2 has been tough to take for many Northland tourism operators as they remain cut off for the foreseeable future. But for others, the risk of COVID in the north isn't worth the boost in business. Nita Blake-Person reports.
The Friday before school holidays, and this Paihia beach would normally be bracing for hordes of visitors. Across the road, Nikki Kempthorne from Edgewater Palms Accommodation has this reality.
Our school holidays will be booked, and they literally were booked, and then each day we get the cancellations coming through, which is soul destroying, as you can imagine. And we know that we have to just go with it and it will come back, but these next 2 weeks were hugely important to us and our staff, the whole industry, and it's devastating.
They've had about 8 stays in the past 6 weeks. Normally that would be hundreds. While the weather warms up, the chances of visitors making the most of Northland's early summer look increasingly slim, with Auckland's borders likely to remain in place through level 2. Nikki Kempthorne says the north is an island and times are tough.
Unfortunately, with Auckland closed, no one can get here, and they may have put flights on, but I don't know anyone in the industry here who's seeing that at all.
While it wouldn't be a silver bullet, Kempthorne is supportive of a travel corridor to allow cars to travel through Auckland's lockdown for non-essential reasons. Joey manages a restaurant in Paihia and agrees it could be the boost business needs.
Travel corridor would be the best thing, for the ones that are on the same levels as us, that can get through Auckland a bit easier and come up here and do a bit of travelling around, and it's coming into summertime, so weather's getting nice and it's getting good, and definitely need a bit more people here.
At his Bay Beach hire kayak shed, Nick Tepani says there's definitely a drop in customers, but the risks around travel are still high.
If they opened up the gates in Auckland and COVID made it up here, our elders are going to get hit hard and fast. And that's not going to be good at all. Neither is the fact that we've got no tourists up here. No good for our business and that, but we can't afford to have Delta whipping its tail around here in the north,
He's not convinced loosening restrictions is the answer.
If I had the answers, I wouldn't be pushing people out in kayaks. I'd be down there pushing a pen and a suit. So that I'll leave to the ones in the know, supposedly.
The split views are reflected right across town, and it's the debate at the heart of the COVID defence to risk health and boost business.
I think right now the risk is probably too great, because until we're really sure we're around the current outbreaks, the risk would be too much.
It would definitely help the north and because especially Pai here, we're all about tourism, and these guys are suffering. It's really hard.
It would be nice to see more travel through from Auckland to up here, because business-wise there's a lot of traffic, not coming up here, and that's stopping a lot of our loads and customers buying things. And also, it'll be good for whānau as well to come up.
We did rely on Auckland travel to come through and make our rent and put our food on the table, really. But because of, majority of the cases that has happened there in Auckland, it is 50-50, that we could take on a risk of, allowing that travel to come.
Whangarei Mayor Cheryl Mai says she's hearing from more and more people desperate to be reconnected to the rest of the country.
For the sectors of our community, the hospitality sector in particular, and people who want to run events, they're all really feeling the pinch, and this could mean the end of their businesses.
She's regularly checking in with central government on the issue, but today Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson seemed to pour cold water on any corridor calls.
The decisions that were made there were made on public health grounds. They were made to make sure that we limited travel through Auckland while we want to facilitate it where we can. We also are very aware of increased volumes leading to potential risks.
For now, flights from Wellington and Kirikiri or Whangarei remain the only way out of Taitokoro for tourists. Air New Zealand says it will endeavour to keep the temporary flights going for as long as Auckland's travel restrictions remain.
Meanwhile, wedding planners around the country are also being hit hard just as the season begins, due to Auckland still being in lockdown and alert level 2 hampering gathering numbers. Hawke's Bay is a popular region for weddings with its warm sunny days and picturesque oceans. One venue says they're going to lose 3/4 of their bookings for this month. Our reporter Tom Kitchen explains.
Just outside Napier sits Meadowwood, a wedding venue boasting Art Deco buildings, teepee tents, beautiful surroundings and birds chirping in trees. Spring was set to be a sellout stunner for them after spending about $100,000 on upgrades. Now everything is up in the air and owner Emma Hedden is worried.
Looks like we're going to lose about 75% of our October weddings, and that's just 1 month, and who knows how long this is going to go on.
She says it's hard on couples too.
It's actually just really hard on wedding couples. I've had so many brides on the phone to me just crying. At this stage in their planning process, it should just be fun, wrapping up those last few details, and in actual fact it's not fun because they're just it's the uncertainty. They just don't know if their wedding's going to go ahead.
One of those brides is Marcia Nelson, who should be gliding up the aisle next week. She has a guest list of about 140, but thinks she'll have to cut this back, which will be hard.
It's quite an awkward situation where we didn't feel like we could wait until the last minute to let guests know, so we've had to basically choose some of our guests to kindly request that if we're still in level 2 next week, we'd ask them to step back from attending our wedding.
She thought when the country went into lockdown with just one case, she might be okay, but it's dragged on.
When we started planning our wedding earlier in the year, we thought that we'd kind of shaken COVID to a certain extent, even though we all knew it had a chance of rearing its head. But it kind of all happened quite suddenly, I guess.
It's also been challenging for Bex Taken of Planet Events.
We've had a series of cancellations, unfortunately. We had a really busy October booked, which is now virtually empty. November we've faced a few cancellations from weddings who were based in Australia and who now can't get enough of their family and friends here to get married.
She says businesses in her field need support, like a pat on the back or just telling them they're doing a good job. Some are taking advantage of restrictions to get married with just a handful of guests. Joe Tobosh of Dreamy Little Weddings has seen a rise in small wedding bookings of around 10 people. It's come as a surprise.
We couldn't sort of figure out what started it, actually, because was it our advertising at that time, but I actually think it was just during lockdown and people were thinking, what should we do? You know, this is just going to go on and on and on. So we want to get married, so let's do it.
But small weddings don't solve the problem for larger venues. Emma Hedden from Meadowwood is calling on the government to not forget businesses like theirs over this time.
Will the government support us just because we're not in Auckland? And I think they should. I think they need to. I think certainly the hospitality industry has got to be supported. You know, we've just been hit so hard.
She's calling for more on the wage subsidy and resurgent support payments.
Tokyo Olympic bronze medalist David Nika is saddened but not surprised a bout manipulation system existed in boxing at the 2016 Rio Games. An independent investigation commissioned by amateur boxing's governing body, AIBA, found judges used hand signals at the ringside to rig 14 bouts, including the super heavyweight final. Clay Wilson reports.
David Nika got a place on the podium in Tokyo earlier this year, but he didn't even get the chance to compete at the 2016 Rio Games. He failed to secure a spot after being beaten by Uzbekistan's Rustam Tulaganov in an Asia-Oceania tournament. That's despite the New Zealander landing 20 more punches than Tulaganov, who went on to win bronze in Rio. So the findings of an investigation showing corruption, bribery and manipulation of results during both the Games and qualifying tournaments comes as little surprise to Nika.
For a lot of boxers, our worst worries and fears kind of came true or were true. I feel like I may have been on the end of one or two wrong decisions.
The AIBA was not involved in the Tokyo Games, with its status as a governing body suspended by the International Olympic Committee in 2019. Nika believes the boxing in Tokyo was judged fairly and correctly, but says the AIBA must act quickly or the recent corruption will leave an indelible stain on the sport.
The IOC have done everything that they needed to in order to clean up the Tokyo Olympics, and I didn't see a single wrong decision at the Olympics. So now it's up to IBA to clean up the sport, but they've got a big job ahead of them, I think.
Nika says it's incredibly disappointing the organisation that was supposed to protect amateur boxers from corruption was unfairly influencing fights. He says there have been concerns about the AIBA for many years.
It was in the back of all of our minds. We knew that there were some uncontrollables out there. And well, I guess if you've got money in your pocket, it's not uncontrollable, but totally disappointing. As athletes, we literally put our bodies and lives on the line, so it's pretty heartbreaking.
The revelations of corruption may put boxing's place in the 2024 Paris Games further in doubt. It was already under threat, with the IOC deeply concerned with the governance of the AIBA. Nika says the investigation's findings hurt boxing's chances of remaining an Olympic sport.
I really hope that IBA gets it together and fixes the sport, because it's one of the most primitive and historic sports at the Olympics. So to have its inclusion on a knife edge going into the Paris Olympics is really sad.
Nika will now fight in the professional ranks and has a yet-to-be-confirmed bout lined up before the end of the year.
This next story really is nuts. In Fargo, in the US state of North Dakota, one man is fighting a losing battle with a tiny red squirrel. The furry animal has been taking walnuts from a large black walnut tree in the front yard, and it's been using the bonnet of Bill Fisher's Chevy truck as a winter storage pantry. CNN's Kevin Valavand reports.
The red squirrel will come up behind, run along the frame rail, and then all the way up to the front.
Bill Fisher just cannot win the war. A beautiful black walnut tree in the yard produces nuts that a red squirrel finds irresistible. But the problem is,
mostly under the hood and in the fenders,
that red squirrel has picked Bill's Chevy Avalanche.
A lot of places inside the radiator fan, all the way through here. That corner's been covered full with walnuts.
As the winter storage hideout for hundreds of nuts, each about the size of a small lemon.
It was planning on camping there for the winter.
Bill has cleaned out 42 gallons of black walnuts from his truck in every crack and crevice of his Avalanche, the engine compartment, fenders. Nothing is off limits.
I had to pull the fenders off and clean all the walnuts out. I thought I had them all, took it down the road, turned the corner, I found one rolling inside the windshield cowl where the wipers go.
Bill's dog Asher is beside himself. That pesky little red squirrel seems to taunt him. And to think this just happened over a few days the truck was parked.
It's one red squirrel that's doing this as far as going into the pickup.
Bill got most of the black walnuts out, but a few are not retrievable.
I have some rolling around inside the frame rails as well that I can't get at.
Can you hear it?
I can hear them, yes.
Absolutely brilliant. I actually think the red squirrel should be allowed to win. That's one determined little creature. Chevy Avalanche seems appropriate, doesn't it? Because, wow, that is one avalanche of walnuts. So many of you getting in contact about this idea of a level V2. So 1 month to get vaccinated, or we start to bring in limits, which is the idea of one epidemiologist, Professor Rod Jackson. This person says no vaccine, no access. It's the same as smoking. No access to so many public and private places, which is an accepted given. Someone else says just get vaccinated, not by the end of October, just do it by tomorrow. Another listener reckons $500 if you get the vax is the proper carrot. Exclusion is the stick. But not everyone agrees. What sort of carrot is an offer for those who have no stable home environment and basic good food on the table and enough to pay the bills? They might not care about travel, restaurants or concert tickets. It's time to get real about what real care for community and the team of 5 million is all about. Kevin in Napier says, great idea for vaccination certificate. My brother went and saw Bobby McFerrin on Sunday night. Photo ID, double vax verification and a mask were compulsory in order to gain entry. No mask, vax certificate or ID and you didn't get in. Anyone who removed their mask in the theatre were ejected. That's the way it should be. California has some things right, says Kevin. And Sharon has got in touch to say, this is a great idea, level 2V. It's time for the stick. We all want to get out of this. Anti-vax or hesitant ones just need to do it. My 11-year-old cannot get a vaccination yet, says Sharon. Everyone over 11 should get a vaccination to protect those who can't. Mike, who's 85, raises a good point. Mike says, I don't own a smartphone, so can't download an app. I have a vaccine record card for 2 jabs. Will that still be valid when the app comes out? Another person says vax passport highly discriminatory and unconstitutional against the Human Rights Charter and the sort of control that is only exercised by communist, totalitarian regimes such as China. It is a dangerous step down, this person says, a slippery slope. Catherine, on the other hand, reckons do it, government. She says, I particularly support the message about getting it done this weekend so you can celebrate Christmas.
Ahia Himarie, RNZ News at 6, ko Sarah Thompson tōko ingoa. The Premier of New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian, has resigned amid an investigation by the state's corruption watchdog. The Independent Commission Against Corruption will hold public hearings later this month to investigate whether there was a conflict between Ms Berejiklian's public duties and private interests when she was in a personal relationship with then MP Daryl Maguire. Ms Berejiklian said she was stepping aside because she did not want to be a distraction amid the COVID-19 outbreak.
In all the decisions I have ever made as a Minister or as Premier of New South Wales, my first consideration has always been the well-being and welfare of the people of this state. I cannot predict how long it will take the ICAC to complete this investigation, let alone deliver a report. Therefore, it pains me to announce that I have no option but to resign from the office of Premier.
Her successor has not yet been announced. It looks unlikely the government will bring in a travel corridor to allow movement through to Northland during Tamaki Makaurau's lockdown. Border checkpoints are expected to remain, even if Auckland moves to level 2 next week, meaning no one can get through without an essential reason. The Deputy Prime Minister, Grant Robertson, says he understands people are concerned about not being able to move freely, but there has to be balance.
The decisions that were made there were made on public health grounds. They were made to make sure that we limited travel through Auckland while we want to facilitate it where we can. We also are very aware of increased volumes leading to potential risks.
Grant Robertson says flights are available between Northland and Wellington, which keep the regions connected. Just one of today's 19 COVID cases has not yet been linked. Health officials are talking to the person to work out what their connection may be to the outbreak. And the Director of Public Health, Caroline McElnay, says just one of yesterday's cases has not yet been linked to other cases. There are 9 unlinked cases in total from the past fortnight and 5 active subclusters. A woman whose brother spent 17 days with his 3 young children in dense King Country bush says it's been an emotional roller coaster for the rest of the family who feared they were dead. Tom Phillips and his children returned to his parents' farmhouse in Marokopa yesterday morning after nearly a week after the official search has been called off. His sister, Rosie Petherbridge, told Checkpoint it had been a harrowing experience and they had all but lost hope.
I think at the moment we're just all really trying to reconnect and, understand everything and just surround them with love and support and understanding and just take each day as it comes.
Rosie Petherbridge says the children are enjoying catching up with their cousins and appear healthy and well. A man has been charged after yesterday's dramatic police chase across Auckland. The police say a 28-year-old has been charged with presenting a firearm to police, dangerous driving and failing to stop. Another man who was shot by police remains in hospital under guard. The men were arrested in Hillsborough yesterday after a chase which began in Otahuhu. A large crowd of gang members and other mourners were moved on by police from a funeral home in West Auckland this afternoon. The police say they received calls from the public about the gathering at the funeral home on Paramount Drive in Henderson. Police officers reminded those present of the rules under COVID Level 3 and all were compliant and moved along. However, police now understand some groups are gathering in other locations in West Auckland. 2 people have been arrested after a disorder incident in central Wellington. Police have been at the scene at the intersection of Manners and Cuba. There was reportedly a large crowd that dispersed when officers arrived. It's 4 minutes past 6. The former French President Nicolas Sarkozy is to appeal against his 1-year prison sentence for spending $20 million more than allowed on his unsuccessful re-election campaign in 2012. If the sentence is upheld, he will serve it at home wearing an electronic tracker. The BBC's Mike Sander reports.
Nicolas Sarkozy denied knowing about spending too much on his campaign. He said any malpractice was down to the public relations firm Pygmalion, his centre-right party hired to run it. But the court in Paris accepted that he'd been made aware of the excesses and did nothing about them. Some of his 13 co-defendants were convicted of forging invoices to cover it up. In March, he became the first former French president to be given a custodial sentence. He'd promised a judge a plum job in return for divulging information about another legal case against him.
Cycle trails damaged by flooding and storms over the winter are to be repaired in time for summer thanks to $650,000 worth of government funding. The money comes from the $8 million New Zealand Cycle Trail Fund. Most of the money is being spent on trails in Hauraki and Queenstown, with smaller amounts going to those in Northland and the Tasman. Moving into sport news, the Wellington Phoenix coach Ufuk Talay says he made Stephen Taylor the A-League football team's new captain in a bid to convince him to stay at the club. The veteran English defender made a shock retirement this week, just days after being announced as captain. Tokyo Olympics bronze medalist David Nika is disappointed the organisation that was supposed to protect amateur boxers from corruption was fixing fights at the 2016 Rio Games. An independent investigation has found that a manipulation system for bouts existed in Rio and the qualifying tournaments. Nika, who missed out on Rio after losing a qualifying bout many thought he comfortably won, says concerns about the governing body, the AIBA, have existed for many years.
It was in the back of all of our minds. We knew that there were some uncontrollables out there. And, well, I guess if you've got money in your pocket, it's not uncontrollable, but totally disappointing. As athletes, we literally put our bodies and lives on the line, so it's pretty heartbreaking.
And finally, West Ham United are 2 from 2 in football's second-tier Europa League after beating Rapid Vienna 2-0 in London. Leicester City have lost 1-0 at Legia Warsaw. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Trevor Ricci, the man who brings you a world full of music every Tuesday, selects the mixtape. Reb Fountain is this week's Friday Night Live act. Country Life meets the man behind a project to preserve New Zealand's beekeeping history. Because the first Chatham Cup football final was played in New Zealand on this day in 1923, we've got a Sonic Tonic dedicated to the songs of soccer on Nights with Yard and the Saw, filling in for me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7. on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, on air, online and on demand. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Aharoi Saturday. In the west from Northland to Manawatu, also for the central high country, it'll be partly cloudy with isolated showers. And for the remainder of the North Island, it'll be generally fine with some cloudy areas this evening and tomorrow morning. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury will be fine apart from cloud about coastal Canterbury tonight and tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland will be mainly fine with a few showers about the south coast and the chance of a shower about eastern Otago tomorrow. Bulla and Westland will be partly cloudy with the odd shower, but long fine spells south of Hokitika tonight. Fiordland will be mostly cloudy with occasional rain or showers, and for the Chatham Islands, a few showers. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Aharoi Saturday. It's 8 minutes past 6.
No mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The latest vaccination rates show Māori in Auckland won't come anywhere near the 90% first dose challenge laid down by the Prime Minister in time for next week's alert level review. And reaching that target could take months. Jacinda Ardern hinted that hitting the 90% mark could influence restrictions on Auckland, but she later clarified that needs to be across all groups, including Māori. The Prime Minister's already confirmed even if there is a shift in levels, the hard border around the super city will remain. So what does the vaccination picture look like for Auckland? It is possibly the most tantalisingly delicious carrot some of us have sniffed in a while. Freedom. But there's a catch. More of us need to take the shot to get a lasting taste. The super city, ground zero for the Delta outbreak, is split into 3 areas when it comes to ethnicity-related vaccination stats. Auckland, counties Manukau and Waitemata.
Oh, really? We already done those. Yep. Some people, they're afraid to do the vaccine. I don't know why.
90% of eligible non-Māori, non-Pacific people have had their first Pfizer jab in Auckland. So bullseye for the target. But contain your excitement. For Māori in the same catchment, it's just 67%. In counties Manukau, just over half of eligible Māori have had their first dose, compared to 87% for people who are not Māori or Pacifica. The gap in Waitemata is marginally better. The Māori first jab rate is 63% across all age groups, compared to 85% for Pākehā.
What was stopping you getting it earlier?
It was work, to be honest, time. Yeah. Because I work, shift pattern, trying to get the right time to come in. Yeah.
If we look at second doses in counties Manukau, it's a chasm. The rate for Māori is half that of non-Māori, non-Pacific people.
We just didn't have time to come out to do it because we have 3 kids. There's no one to look after them, so we just had time today to come out and get it done.
And a deeper dive reveals a sea of disparity. Young people have been hammered in this outbreak. About a quarter of the people who've caught Delta are 20 to 29 years old. Counties Manukau lags way behind in that lower age bracket. First dose rates for Māori aged 20 to 34 are less than half that for Pākehā. So a bunch of numbers, but the number one takeaway, Māori vaccination rates significantly trail non-Māori, non-Pacifica. And that dangling carrot may prove to be a rarer delicacy than we would like. Professor Chris Cunningham is the Māori Health and Development Research Centre Director at Tupu Manawa Hauora. He says there's 3 major issues at play here.
One of them is to do with demographics, another is to do with decades of disparity, and the third is to do with Māori distrust of the system. To take them one at a time, if we look at demographics, we have Māori aged under 12 years of age, 26%. That means that currently 1 in 4 Māori are not even eligible for vaccination. The government is aiming for 90% coverage of the eligible Māori population. If you compute the numbers, they're actually aiming for 66% of the Māori population to be covered, and I think those targets are ambitious. So demographics is against us when 1 in 3 Māori are unlikely to be vaccinated, even on a good day. The second is around decades of disparity. We've had decades of disparity which have resulted in Māori and Pacifica having much higher levels of vulnerability. So it's no surprise when we see outbreaks in South Auckland, when we see outbreaks in transitional housing, and we see those outbreaks in households in South Auckland where one person takes it home and 6 other people in the household become infected. That's due to a long history of disparity, and we can't magic those disparities away overnight. So demographics and disparities are really very difficult things to change on the spot. The third issue is around Māori distrust of the system. Now, this is often categorised, the narrative is around hesitancy. It's not about people hesitating, it's actually about people having a distrust of the system. Why do Māori distrust the system? I think the picture etched in my mind is a picture of a young Māori mother, babe in arms, in a hospital, and beside her are her whānau and her midwife, and on the other side of the bed are the hospital administrator, the social worker from Oranga Tamariki, and a police officer about to uplift that baby. That's the reason why Māori distrust not only the hospital system, but the police and the social work system. And Māori don't see those systems as independent of each other. So if you distrust one system, you're much more likely to distrust all of the systems. So I think that's the big elephant in the room, is how do we approach that distrust to try and get the vaccination rates up.
And those are huge issues you just outlined, right? So what can we do in the short term?
So in terms of the distrust thing, I think what Māori want to see is they want to see a Māori face when they go to services. So what's been happening very recently in terms of Māori providers going face-to-face, having buses and so on, I think is the right thing to do. I think the misstep that we made is we didn't do these things earlier on. Lisa, the first vaccination was the 19th of January. We're now 9 months later and we're struggling to get to the targets that we've set ourselves. One of the reasons, I think, is for the first 3 or 4 or 5 months, we were forced into a situation where we were rationing vaccines. We did not have enough supply. We did not have enough service. We didn't even have a vaccine register to be able to roll the program out quickly. And so the government had to ration it, and it had to choose criteria. Now, it got many things right. I think vaccinating those people who have high exposure in their workplace, people at the border, people working in hospitals, that was the right thing to do. The second thing they did was to vaccinate people who have high levels of vulnerability. So no one would question vaccinating old people in rest homes. That's the right thing to do. But I think the misstep was the next step, and that's where the government rolled vaccine delivery out using age. Now, if you look at the demographics again, there are fewer Māori older people. And so as you roll it out by age, you are literally offering the vaccine to more Pākehā people proportionately than Māori people. So I think that's the problem we've got.
So the Prime Minister has been sort of dangling an incentive, saying, get to 90%, particularly in Auckland, which is currently, locked down harder than the rest of the country. And she's indicated that this could help our chances in terms of a level shift, right? So, and we get these figures that show, well, we're over 80% in Auckland, but if you crunch the numbers, not so for Māori. So I'm wondering how far off or how much time do you realistically think we need to get Māori vaccination rates to a target like 90%?
Well, I think first we would have to have vaccine available to children down to 5 years of age. That's not going to happen this week. It may not happen in the next 2 months, but you have to be able to vaccinate down to the age of 5. Even then, 11% of the Māori population misses out, but that's much nearer a realistic 90% than we currently have. So
what about eligible population, Professor? If we work with who is eligible now, how long do you reckon the run-in needs to be to get 90% of Māori who are currently eligible vaccinated? Are we talking 3 months, 6 months? What do you think is realistic?
I think we will struggle to do that by the end of the year. The population we should look to, Lisa, are the Asian population. They have done fantastically well. They have the highest rates of vaccination in the country. They have vaccination rates for the second dose which are equivalent to the first dose for Māori. So they have just quietly gone about getting vaccinations. 700,000 Asian people in New Zealand, they've done a good job. So we should look at what's happening in that sector to get some clues. But to your first question, I think we are going to struggle to get to 90% of the eligible Māori population before the end of the year.
And that was Professor Chris Cunningham. On the precipice of a future or significant failure. That's how the Whānau Ora Minister described the current state of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout today. Pēnea Henare met with iwi health providers across Te Tautukaro in Whangarau for breakfast this morning to talk mata korona and lagging Māori vaccination rates. Ane te kai reporter Sam Ollie.
Pēnea Henare, back home, his first trip out of Pōneke since lockdown. Less than 50% of eligible Māori have received their first vaccine in Northland, among the worst rates in the country. The Minister acknowledged the heavy workload for iwi providers, assuring them he had their backs, and the pressure was on DHBs to get more Māori through the door too.
To confront our DHBs to say, you said you would do this, and I'm here to make sure it's happened. Because if it hasn't, there will be repercussions, because we find ourselves on a precipice of a future or a significant failure.
Hui attendees had wero to put to Minita Henare too. They said funding had been piecemeal. Whakawhiti Ora Pai General Manager Errol Murray said his organisation had received money, but it was only to pay for extra staff, not the infrastructure they need.
At the moment we have a workforce shortage up here in the north, and that sort of capacity may not be available, and we don't need FTEs, some of us need camper vans so that we can be more mobile without having to lease it at these high prices.
Kia ora Ngāti Wai Chief Executive Lynette Stewart said a large part of the problem was that Māori health providers were underfunded going into the pandemic. They needed to be trusted with bigger overarching funding for the rollout.
A lot of the money we've got now, we're so busy accounting for it, it's hard to just let loose and go out. I mean, I bought 2 transit vans a couple of years ago, hallelujah, because it took me 5 years to save up for those. So we're right on the cusp. But a lot of my colleagues here today haven't got those transit vans.
Hawara Hokianga Chief Executive Margarethe Broodcorn said taking jabs to the most isolated communities was working, but not everyone has welcomed vaccinators with open arms.
We had our little protesters across the way, and they had their say, they had their little placards and their little haka that they did.
And complicating matters further, some staff are vaccine hesitant too.
Support us as health providers to go down that path of saying actually all of our kaimahi need to be vaccinated, and as an organisation we currently are sitting at 60% uptake of our staff that are vaccinated. We can't say thou shalt because we're not allowed to, because we'll have our unions on our case.
Te Hau Ora o Ngāpuhi Chief Executive Te Ropu Poa had one solution for that.
If kaimahi aren't vaccinated, they get tested every week on a Thursday so they don't have to stay home because it's asymptomatic, and then put your trainees there because they'll get sick of getting poked in the nose and get vaccinated.
Minister Henare assured the hui the whakaaro would be relayed to Wellington by his team.
So I'm sick and tired of what a great breakfast it was, and then nothing sort of followed up on afterwards.
He also met with the Northland DHB, GPs, pharmacists and Whangarei Boys High School students today.
It is 21 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. 2 big announcements from Australia today. The first being a shock resignation of New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian after 5 years in the position. It comes as the state's corruption watchdog has revealed it's investigating whether she breached public trust.
I cannot predict how long it will take the ICAC to complete this investigation. Therefore, it pains me to announce that I have no option but to resign from the office of Premier. My resignation will take effect as soon as the New South Wales Liberal Party can elect a new parliamentary leader. In order to allow the new leader and government a fresh start, I'll also resign from the New South Wales Parliament once I've consulted the Electoral Commission on appropriate timing for a by-election, given the COVID restrictions.
The Independent Commission Against Corruption had been investigating former Wagga Wagga MP Daryl Maguire to see if he used his position for financial gain. It was then revealed he had a secret on-again, off-again relationship with Ms Berejiklian over 5 years. Now she's being investigated in regards to a conflict of interest and grant funding. She says the resignation couldn't have come at a worse time, but it's out of her hands.
Resigning at this time is against every instinct in my being and something which I do not want to do. I love my job and I love serving the community, but I have been given no option following the statement that's been issued today. I do not want to be a distraction from what should be the focus of the state government during this pandemic, which is the well-being of our citizens. It always has been and always will be. Notwithstanding the challenges of the last few years and few months in particular, I have never felt stronger nor more confident in my leadership. I have absolutely no regrets during my time in public life. My only regret will be not to be able to finish the job to ensure the people of New South Wales transition to living freely with COVID.
She says serving as Premier has been the greatest privilege of her life. Meanwhile, Scott Morrison has announced that the international border will reopen next month for states that have reached 80% vaccinated. Starting with New South Wales, fully inoculated Australians and permanent residents arriving into the state will be able to quarantine at home for 7 days.
This is an important next step in the national plan. This is set out in the national plan. No surprises here. This is what we agreed to do. That we said to Australians, we get to 80%, you can leave the country and you can come back again. If you're overseas, you should be able to come back if you're a fully vaccinated Australian resident or citizen. I'm going to keep the deal with Australians when it comes to the national plan. I'm going to keep the deal which said you go and get vaccinated and we're going to ensure that the many liberties and opportunities that you have will be restored. It is a great and terrible thing that they have had to be taken away because of the pandemic. We've all understood it, we've all worked through it, we've all suffered through it. But the time has come to give Australians their life back. We're getting ready for that, and Australia will be ready for takeoff very soon.
Travellers must be fully vaccinated with an approved vaccine to home quarantine, unless they are under the age of 12 or are medically exempt. Commercial flights out of the country will also resume for vaccinated Australians. A farmer who contracted COVID-19 last year is encouraging people to get vaccinated, no matter where they live in the country. This comes as rural health experts call for data on how the rollout in rural communities is going, saying they remain concerned coverage is patchy. Rural reporter Maya Burry has the story.
As the global pandemic was being declared in March last year, around 400 delegates from around the world were attending the World Hereford Conference in Queenstown. 39 people were identified in the cluster, including Roxburgh farmer Robin Pennett. She became very sick and is still feeling the impact of the virus, even today.
I still have a really distorted sense of taste and smell, and also probably the immunity is not quite where it was, more likelihood to catch things and a bit more fatigued. So, yeah, it's had an ongoing effect.
Robin Pennett says her experience with COVID was scary and horrible. She says wherever people live, they should get vaccinated, and a way to encourage that is to give people the flexibility of walk-in appointments.
I feel strongly about vaccination, and even though we have some natural immunity from having had the infection before, I've still lined up for my 2 doses.
Ms Pennett says farmers are used to vaccinating their livestock for diseases, so know the good they can do. Waikato farmer Colin Corney was president of the New Zealand Hereford Association at the time of last year's conference and supports that message.
In the farming world, we're very stringent on ensuring that animal welfare is at forefront, and so why wouldn't we do that for ourselves?
He says the outbreak at the conference was a very challenging time. He didn't hesitate to get vaccinated when the opportunity came up.
So COVID's real. We need to look after not only ourselves, but we need to look after our children and all the other businesses and our country. In the industry I work in, most of the people have already gone out and got vaccinated. We all understand we're essential businesses. We need to ensure that we earn a living.
The Rural General Practice Network has been asking for data on rural vaccinations from the Ministry of Health, saying it believes the rates for rural communities and rural Māori in particular are lagging. Waikato University Rural Health Professor Roger Strasser says while the rollout has improved, he still thinks coverage is patchy in the regions. He says more data is needed.
The data isn't collected in a way to actually be sure who's vaccinated and who's not. And now we're aiming for 90+%. Every individual counts. And so counting every individual, monitoring and reporting their vaccination status is very important.
The Ministry of Health says it can't provide information about vaccination rates in rural areas as it only keeps data on a DHB level, but it says it's focused on ensuring equal access to the COVID vaccine for everyone who is eligible.
It's the UN's International Day of Older Persons, and turns out New Zealand tops the list when it comes to the highest number of senior hosts on Airbnb. More than 27% of hosts in the country are over the age of 60, whereas the global average is around 11%. One of those hosts is 88-year-old Phyllis, who's a retired nurse, and her partner Alan, who started opening their home in Papamoa Beach to guests in 2018. Paulina Lau spoke to Phyllis about how it all started.
We wanted to stay in touch with people of all ages, and we had no desire to go into a retirement village. And we're both quite fit and able, and as Alan says, we've both got our marbles. And I play golf, and I also belong to I play bridge. Alan's a bowler, and so we do associate with people our own age as well as younger people. And there was the pressure for young people that were working in kiwi fruit here, and we sort of stumbled on to hosting 3 or 4 of the kiwi fruit workers that were looking for accommodation, and we had 2 bedrooms that we weren't using. So we thought, we'll help out there doing that.
Where have some of the guests come from? Which countries?
We've had quite a number from South America, from Brazil, Argentina, Ecuador, and quite a number from South Africa. The kiwi fruit workers mainly from Germany and France. And it's really nice, talking to them and getting to find out what their family's like and what their country's like and what they do for a living, what their family does.
You signed up in 2018 and of course, end of 2019, 2020, the pandemic hit. So what happened to your guests then? Have you seen more Kiwis come through?
Yes, we have had a few more Kiwis. But we've also, because we were in contact with people through, that were working in the kiwi fruit industry, some of them have been here before COVID hit.
And that was Phyllis talking to Paulina Lau. She is one of our older Airbnb hosts. Thanks for your company. Have a fantastic weekend.
Kia ora tātou. RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian has resigned amid a probe into breaching the public's trust by the state's corruption watchdog. Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson says a travel corridor through to Northland is unlikely, even if Auckland moves to level 2 next week. Just one of today's 19 COVID cases has not yet been linked to existing clusters, and health officials are trying to work out that person's connection to the outbreak. And Australia will reopen its international border from next month to fully vaccinated citizens and permanent residents. Those are your headlines. Our next news update is at 7.
This Sunday morning, Evan Osnos on his new book Wildland, The Making of America's Fury. Professor Peter Kreutz calling home from a place celebrated in song, Galway Bay. We compare the benefits of different types of exercise. There's new research on cardio versus weights. There's a lot of opinion about how to cope with magpies during nesting season. Is there anything that really does work to stop them swooping on us? More of us are working at home and working longer. We'll discuss that. We've got Alison Gofton on using food that's gone off a bit, and Laura Jean McKay, who's won a top science fiction prize. Sunday morning from from 8 o'clock on RNZ National.
Kia ora koutou, you are listening to RNZ